Professor Dalbello. But yes, I'm Alisa Kraut. I'm the president of Source this year, and I am a Master of Information student here at Rutgers with a concentration in archives and preservation. And I am so excited to welcome Amy Cooper-Cary and Marlee Newman here with us tonight. Just going to do a little brief introduction to both of them, and then we're going to get right down to a conversation. Amy Cooper-Cary is the current editor of American Archivists and the co-editor of the Archival Futures series. She's been a member of the SAA for 20 years and has had numerous positions, including as reviews editor and as the member of the American Archivists Editorial Board. And she's also served as the editor of Archival Issues, reviews editor for RBM, and as board member for the Journal of Archival Organization. Amy holds a master's in comparative literature with a specialization in French translation from SUNY Binghamton, and a master's with a specialization in archives and records management, from University of Michigan. And she's also a fellow of the Society of American Archivists. And we also are lucky to have Marlee Newman coming back to the fold. She is an editorial board member of the American Archivists Journal. She holds a master's from Rutgers, and was also an archives and preservation concentration. She also holds a master's in early modern European history from King's College in London. So I am just thrilled to have them here, and we are I'm gonna pin them so we can see them well, and I think this should work. Yes. Excellent. We are also going to have, thank you so much, Laura Melbourne, who's the vice president of Source. She posted in the chat some information, some great links for those who would like them. And she'll also be monitoring the chat as we go along. And we definitely want to have time for questions at the end. So I have a list of questions, and we may not get to all of them because it's important that we all get it, that you get a chance to talk to Marlee and Amy. Okay. So I'm going to jump right in, and this will help us get to know you both a little better, which is, I'd like to know what led you both into archives as a professional direction, and how professional publishing has been instrumental to that experience. So I'd like to start with Amy.
Great. Well, first, thank you for having me. Thank you to Marlee for suggesting this and bringing it to happen. It's just a great opportunity, and I love speaking with people. So thank you all for being here, and thank you to Marija, to Alisa, to Marlee, everybody who's been so great in organizing this. It's just fabulous. My professional direction as archives, I came to the profession late in my career. Before this, I actually worked for 10 years for the now defunct Borders Book Group. Worked in their purchasing and arm, and worked with publishers. And kind of, they were starting to get too big, and so I decided to go into library school. That was my answer, was library school. And the first class that I took was the history of books and printing, and I was a goner. I was like, okay, that's it. I know what I'm going to do. I am going to follow the archives path and work with the old stuff and the rare stuff. You know, at that time, and this was quite some time ago now, but at that time there was some conversation going on about electronic materials, but you know, a lot was still being done with paper and dead people's mail, and so you know, I was really hooked. Fortunately, I stayed hooked through my professional career and have seen kind of the shifts in in the professional practice. And I had an opportunity to teach as well. So I started out in archives at the University of South Dakota. I was there for a few years. I went to the University of Iowa. I was there for another several years, and then came here to Wisconsin and taught for 7 years at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee in the School of Information Studies and directed their program. So ever since I have been involved in archives, ever since I was a baby archivist in South Dakota, I've been involved in the literature. I remember the first thing that I did was I served on an awards committee for the Margaret Cross Norton Award in the Midwest Archives Conference. And that was looking at the issues of archival issues and deciding on the best article for a 2-year period. Again, I was a goner. The literature has really formed my experience throughout my career, and that's because not only as an archivist have I relied on it as a source for information, inspiration, and conversation, but as an instructor, taking a deep dive into the literature and really introducing my students to the important things that people have to say was critical. And not only the current literature, but the past literature. So, I always stress that we have conversations that kind of recur. They're cyclical in the profession, and you see that in the literature. So for me, the archival literature has serving as the editor of American Archivist is one kind of an amazing culmination for me, and a really it's a true honor to be in this position. But it's an honor because I respect and am deeply seated in what the writing that has come before, and to see the writing that is coming out now, it's just a fantastic experience. So I guess that's kind of that in a nutshell, Marlee.
Funnily enough, I think I have a kind of similar story, but perhaps in a slightly different order. I started out in history academia. As was mentioned, I got my master's degree in King's College London. I did a thesis on the impact of the plague on the book industry in London in the 17th century. And so book history was immediately kind of a part of that. And I moved from my master's degree into starting to do a PhD in history. And as I progressed through the PhD in history, I was like, oh no, this isn't the bit that I like. Doing the history bit isn't the bit that I want. What really actually interests me is how we tell the narratives and how we remember and present the past, rather than a particular incredibly niche area of history. So I left the PhD and I ended up working in nonfiction publishing in London, in publicity and marketing, but also I did an internship in editorial, and that's how I ended up getting employed there for publicity and marketing. And so again, I was just kind of constantly surrounded with books and how we tell stories, and also in this instance, like the nuts and bolts of publishing and how you put a book together and how you put a campaign for a book together, and all of these things. And then when I moved to New York, which this all sounds very grand, and I promise it wasn't, it led me to volunteering in libraries and archives, and then eventually going to school for library and archives. And that has always been the through line for me, is kind of, how do we tell narratives? How do we think about the past? How do we present the past? different types of information, learned information versus, vernacular information, and what that looks like in an archival setting, all of those sorts of things. So then when I left school, I was actually encouraged to kind of submit my application to the SAA, which I think, we'll kind of address later. I'm so grateful to Felicia Owens for pushing me in that direction. And I immediately went to the publishing categories because I knew that was a wonderful way for me to marry all of my passions together. And I have so much respect for writers and what writers do, and being able to be part of their process, and seeing how they think through seeing the drafts of their writing, or even, just one draft of their writing, is such a privilege. So that's what leads me to where I am now. Yeah.
Thank you both. I love hearing everybody who comes into the archives world, the universe, always comes from different places. And sometimes the way we come here is it's sort of winding, but then when you look back, it always makes sense, right? Mm-hmm. That's something that I know I see in my own background, that if I would see each piece, when I see each piece and I make those decisions, I never know where they're going to go. But then when I look back, I say, oh, this is where I belong. Right. So just to get more into your work with the journal, because I think a lot of us are really interested in professional publishing and how much we gain because we do so much reading of it while we're in the program, and how do we get our toes in there, and what is it that you are looking for, and how do you shape the journal? So how do you steer the journal thematically, and then also, which is sort of really not necessarily completely related, but what are some key points in a successful submission? How from the big picture, I think, and as detailed as you'd like to get.
It's really interesting. I love that. I love that question of how do you steer American Archivist, because in some ways you do not. American Archivist relies on submissions, and that relies on the writing by the membership, and that relies on what people are interested in talking about at any given time. And so it is very interesting if you read back issues. That's why I say our conversation in the literature is cyclical. If you read back issues and you see what people were writing about, you see that we were writing about, for example, the power dynamics in the archives in the early 2000s, and we were writing about social memory in the late 1990s. And we were trying to figure out how to manage and appropriately gather materials and collection development in the 70s. So you read these works, many of them canonical, some of them not, and you kind of understand that people that the archives journal, and I would say American Archivist, but any of the journals that we have at our disposal are organic in nature. That is, they come from the people who are actually working and doing the practice. With that said, sometimes things do happen thematically. For example, the upcoming issue has 3 really interesting articles coming out that specifically speak to engagement in different parts of professional development, including the ACA, graduate, the GPAS, the graduate programs. The acronym has just gone right out of my head, but the GPAS and the Archives Leadership Institute. Next issue, 86-1, coming up for spring, summer of next year, actually will include some of the material that you may have already read for the A Census too. That's going to be included in the journal as the body of record for the profession. We'll be publishing some of that with some commentary. And then having some really reflective pieces about where we are as professionals. This is what people are writing about right now. It's very, very interesting to me that we're all kind of looking at ourselves and looking at our archival identity and trying to say, what are we doing and how are we doing it and why are we doing it? So it's kind of an exciting time. And that theme has really kind of developed by itself. It's not something that, we haven't said, oh, we want to write about this theme. With that said, 86-2 will have a themed section, and you probably saw in 85-2 or 1, the thematic section on archives, design archives.
It was 2.
I think it was 2. So you saw design archives come through. In 86-2, we're going to publish a thematic section on Middle Eastern and North African archives, and that is being overseen by a couple of our board members, Sumaya Ahmed and Rebecca Hankins, who are guest editors for that project. So, and you probably have seen their call for papers, right? So I think that it's really interesting to consider where American Archivist goes thematically. With that, successful submissions really run the gamut. I think submissions can be successful in many different ways. There are submissions that are really appealing because they have engaged heavy-duty research, really thorough, excellent bodies of solid information about our profession and how we are addressing certain things. And there's some of these articles that are coming out are just fantastic in the research that they've done. There are other things that come through as perspective pieces, writing that is a little more think piecey or, not really research driven, but has a lot to say about us as professionals and what we are trying to accomplish as a group, as a body of professionals. There are certainly great case studies that are coming through, and those are looking at specific elements, usually a very focused look at projects, how a project develops, and that might be a certain aspect of a project. So, it might be the digitization process aspect, or it might be the collection development process, or it could be, working with researchers from National History Day, or any number of topics. But successful submissions all have one real similar quality, and I will say that is the effort of the authors, that the authors put in extraordinary effort to write something that is cohesive. Everything, almost, it is very rare that something comes through to our desk, and Marlee, you can you can back me up on this. It's very rare that it comes through to our desk and is accepted on the first time. Very, very rare. Usually it will come back and I will say, here's the feedback from peer review. Peer review is made up of one board member and two other members who are peer reviewers from the membership. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but if you're really, really interested in this, please attend the Right Away Forum on Thursday of this week, which is happening at noon. You have to sign up for it, but it's going to be a really good discussion. So oftentimes people get feedback from the peer reviewers, and that is a really good jumping off point for helping to improve an article. And most of the time, authors take us up on that, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they abandon the article. They're like, no, I'm not going to do those reviews. So, but it's a really great process, and the editorial board provides really, really good feedback. From your perspective, Marlee, you know, when you look at submissions, I mean, what do you, as a peer reviewer, what do you think is successful?
Well, I was going to say, I think it's an interesting, you know, successful submission is kind of an interesting way to think about it, because obviously when we think about successful, we think, oh yes, this has been published or will be published. I think that no matter what happens to your submission, hopefully something positive will come from it. Even if it's rejected, right, you're still going to get feedback that's going to help you reframe it maybe, yep, or know which research direction that, like, maybe someone teased out a hole that you didn't see. And, you know, so that's something that I really think is important, is to think about it as a discourse. And I think particularly when you're coming out of grad school, and what you're accustomed to is you submit your paper and you get a grade. And if you get feedback, and, you know, I know from experience with Marija that she gives amazing, thoughtful feedback to anything that you give her. If you want to do any work with that, you're doing it on your own. Whereas when you get in part of the editorial process, you get the chance to try again. You can submit it again. And isn't that amazing that you get to have the feedback from, you know, thoughtful people who are trying to engage with you and push you to make your work better. And even if you don't agree with the feedback that someone's given you, thinking about that and articulating it is going to make your argument better. Mm-hmm. So whether it's a failure, whether it's a failure, goodness, a rejection, a review and resubmit, or a straight up acceptance, hopefully you will get something from it. And it will be something that pushes you forward and makes your argument better. That being said, I think when an article really sings for me is something that's, you know, really tight. The authors really thought about it and they've got a really strong argument. I think that's always the big thing. I don't have to agree with you. That's not my purpose as the reviewer. I could 100% disagree with you, but if you make a strong enough argument, my hands are kind of tied. And that's some of the biggest feedback that I give is like, you haven't sold me on this. Like, your argument's not there yet. Is this what you're saying? Because if so, you haven't got there yet. So that's, for me, when it's a really great submission, is when the argument just like sings, and it's such a pleasure to read those papers. And
sometimes those papers take a couple of iterations to get there.
100%. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But it's a great process. It's a really interesting process. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you can see it. If the argument's good, you can see it in the early drafts. You can see it percolating. Mm-hmm. And you know that if they just tweak it, it'll take off.
Thank you. That's so interesting. I love thinking about the writing process as a process. I mean, the process really cannot be divorced from it, right? I'm really new to writing, and I really only started doing any kind of writing in this program, which was because I came out of a performing arts, theatrical arts background and design background. And it's something that I've really been enjoying developing over this last year and a half that I've been in the program here at Rutgers. And I wanted to know if you both had any advice on developing our writing as sort of new professionals and graduate students. And some of what you talked about really has to do with just depth of experience and research and knowledge. And that's something that, we may come to in time, and that, time is important, right? But I wonder if you had any other thoughts about developing writing with the eye towards eventual publication.
I'll say two things, because I do think thinking about it as a discourse is like a huge point. Another kind of amorphous thing to think about is that, writing and publishing your work is like gardening. I think this is my whole metaphor. You can research and you can plan as much as you want, and you can read and you can read and you can read and you can think and you can think and you can think, but eventually you have to dig some holes and put some plants in the ground and see how it turns out. And some of the plants are going to die, and some of them are going to have to be moved to a different place because they need different light, different conditions. But that's part of it. That's part of the process. That's part of learning how to do it. Mm-hmm. And eventually, dig some holes, put some plants in the ground. And if that is not helpful to someone, and for the people who, and this is how I would have been if I had heard someone say that, it's like, great, that doesn't actually help me all that much. The nuts and bolts bit is be concise. And by that, I mean, choose your words very thoughtfully. It remains a major problem for me when I write. I will pepper through sentences that are ultimately word salad, that they kind of don't mean anything, and they're not pushing my argument in any direction. And the reason why I have them is because I don't know what I'm saying yet. So put them in there, by all means. Put it in a drawer. Come back to it, whether it's the next day, whether it's 2 days, whether it's a week. And notice the sentences where you're like, this doesn't mean anything. And think about what you're actually trying to say. And be concise, be meaningful with the words that you choose. And then just, edit your work. It's okay that if the writing bit is hard, it's okay if the writing bit is easy. It's about getting it onto the page so that you can then edit it. That's the part that's going to be where you're actually able to think, because then you're kind of in a conversation with yourself. And if you kind of forget the fact that you've written it and you know what you think you're trying to say, then you can have the conversation with yourself and parse out what everything is, and think about your structure and think about your word choice and think about your argument and all of those little things. So that's those are the sort of mechanics bits. And cite your work, please.
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 That's really good advice. And my first thing to say is just write. Just write. There is almost nobody that I have read who is perfect in the first draft. We all write crummy first drafts. We all write crummy second drafts. But the other thing that I think people are very intimidated, I think, by academic publishing, by scholarly journals, and I get that. there's a lot of really heady stuff, and people who are really, these are the, when I was back in my day, right, I met Jim O'Toole for the first time, and I don't know if you know who Jim O'Toole is. He's no longer a lion of the profession, but at that time he certainly was, and he was my favorite writer. He writes beautifully. The Archival Fundamentals Series 2, the first volume of that is by Jim O'Toole. It is a masterpiece. It's an amazing conversation about how did we get here? What is it that we as professionals think about? So, seeing anything of his in the American Archivist was like, oh, I got to read Jim O'Toole. It can be intimidating, but there are ways to get into your writing that are not quite that intimidating. And I'm going to post one thing here in the chat. This is the reviews portal. The American Archivist Reviews portal is a fabulous entree into writing about archives. And most of this is because it's either writing about a publication, it's writing about a product, it's writing about a process, it's writing about something that you know. And it is a very low barrier to entry into the writing process. You get a lot of feedback and a lot of coaching from our two fabulous reviews editors, Rose Buchanan and Stephanie Luke. They work you through the process. It is not peer reviewed in that it is not sent out to blind reviews by other people who you don't know and who are just giving you feedback and criticizing what you're writing. These are people who are really working with you to help you talk a little bit about a specific, like I say, a specific product or a specific book. So that's a really great way. Also, the Publications Board has a case studies series, and these are often published in there are university archives case studies, there are ethics case studies, there are a lot of different series. So look for the SAA case studies series. And these are shorter pieces. They're vetted by the Publications Board, but they might give you an opportunity to write about something, again, that you know, something that is going on in your repository. Another great thing is Archival Outlook. If you're writing something, it's a smaller piece, it is focused on, like I say, a particular project or some aspect of the profession that interests you or something like that, Archival Outlook is a great place to start. And we have some really, really good writing coming out in Archival Outlook. So don't, again, attend the Right Away Forum, and don't hesitate to take a look at other venues, other ways that the conversation is developing, because it is not just here in American Archivist that the archival literature is taking shape. It is in other places. Oftentimes, if an article is not successful, is rejected, I will suggest to an author another publishing venue, something that might be more appropriate for this particular piece. So there are other journals, there are lots of opportunities. There are lots of opportunities to get your words out. So write, revise, edit, be concise, and look for all the possibilities.
Thank you so much. That was really some great advice from both of you. And there's some great links in the chat, everybody. Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Amy, for popping the reviews link in there. So I wanted to if anybody has questions about more about writing and publication, definitely put it in the chat, and we're going to take some time at the end to ask some of those questions. But I wanted to take a minute to just step outside of American Archivists for a minute for both of you and ask about your lives outside of your work at the journal, and not only what your lives look like outside of that, but how do you find balance between your editorial work and other projects that you have? Yeah.
Do you want to start, Marlee?
Sure, absolutely. So I, at the same time as getting my MA, I ended up having a baby. So I am like, my work is full-time childcare at the moment, which means that my work with the SAA and with American Archivist is a brilliant way for me to be able to stay engaged with what's going on. And I'm really, really grateful for that opportunity. But definitely, childcare is a 24/7, 365 days a year profession. So definitely I value nap time and preschool time. And the interesting thing about reviewing articles for me is that the first article that I did, I was so nervous and so kind of worried about if I was doing it well and wanting to do it well for the author and for Amy and all of these things. It took me about a week, not solidly working, but it took me about a week to feel confident that I'd done it. And now that I've done it a fair few times, it takes probably an hour. I print out articles and I do a longhand edit first. And then, like I said, I put it in a drawer for myself because I allow the first edit to be everything that I'm thinking. And I really the margins are completely covered in everything that I'm thinking about as I read the article. And then I transcribe it into my PDF copy. And as I'm doing that, then I think about, is this a fair edit? Is this a fair comment that you have? Could you word this in a way that's more helpful? And so I think about, how I'm reflecting back to the author. And then probably after that, I'll give myself a little bit of time and then I submit my review in. So, I think, whether it's childcare or whether it's your job and then coming home and the fact that you have laundry and a stack of dishes and, there's always stuff that's in your life. I think it's just a matter of getting confident in your ability to read the work and trusting your instincts and trusting your own reviewer voice or your editorial voice or whatever you want to call it. And figuring out the structure that works for you to do the work, and then make sure that you can implement that. And that's just carving it in wherever you can. And that's, also, trying to do my own projects because, it's all well and good for me to be writing is like gardening, just do it. I haven't published anything yet. I mean, I graduated in 2020, 2021. I'm still working on the things that I want to submit as articles because it's, it's one thing to give advice, it's another thing to do it. So balancing those things is a struggle, but I wouldn't trade the experience that I'm getting as a reviewer and as being a member of the editorial board and being in conversation with the other people on the editorial board who are so inspiring and so thoughtful, and being present for their thought process during our editorial board meetings. I wouldn't trade any of that for the world. So yeah, that's how I do it.
That's a super answer, and I will say, Marlee, you are a super reviewer. You do a great job. From my perspective, my life outside of American Archivist is taken up by my day job as head of special collections at Marquette here in Milwaukee. We have it's a challenging situation around here, as it is in many universities, and we're short-staffed and overworked and all kinds of things. So that really takes up a lot of bandwidth. Editorial for me is it's a labor of love, and I don't. It's that isn't hyperbole. It really is work that I love to do. I love writing, but I think I almost love editorial work more, because for me, that's an opportunity to engage other people. And how does it balance with my day job? Well, I do my work. Oftentimes people will, if they get my emails and they pay attention to when this is coming out, it's probably at 10:30 or 11 at night. Or it's on Saturday afternoon, or, sometimes I work pretty constantly at job number 1 and then job number 2. So, it is a demand. And then, there are personal things that have to get squished in there, like laundry and cooking and all the other things. But, part of me also says I have never, in my experience, I consider it an opportunity to give back to the profession. And I have always considered my professional development an opportunity to give back to this profession that I have received so much from. We work with this stuff, and I'm pointing to my reading room right now because I sit in a fishbowl, and out there is the reading room, and there is all this stuff out there that 7 people are going to come in and use tomorrow, and they are digging into electronic representation of Tolkien's manuscripts and Native American Catholic boarding school records, and records about Clem Zablocki, who was a socialist mayor here in Milwaukee. And they're working on university archives and Al McGuire and all this stuff. Who gets to do this stuff? It's an amazing profession. And so for me, editorial work really, yeah, it takes a lot, but it also is my opportunity to give back. And I really, really believe that that is what we do when we engage in professional development of any kind, whatever we're doing. It is our opportunity to say, okay, I'm in this. I want to help form what we do going forward. So, yeah, it takes a lot of work.
That is it's good to hear that. We, those of us who are still in grad school, we understand that labor of love. And in a way, just hearing that we need to continue to find the things that bring us that fulfillment, that's important to hear. That's something that we all need to work on. I want to maybe shift over. I mean, I have like a million more questions, but I wanted to shift over to see if we have any questions from our awesome participants here. And I don't think we've had any in the chat, but you can ask it live. I'd love that. So if anybody has any other questions, we want to give you a few minutes to get a jump on that? Anyone? David, yes, I'm going to unmute you.
Hi, I'm just wondering, from my very limited experience of fiction publishing, whether what's the way to put it? Whether you have to deal with flack about your editorial decisions from stakeholders or from the community, whether you get complaints, whether people take issue with what pieces you decide to publish, and how that works and how you deal with it.
I have not, which is
Even
nice.
better.
Even better. However, a few years ago, American Archivist published a very controversial article by Frank Bowles that was peer-reviewed in the traditional way. It was vetted with the work of the editorial board, and the editor at the time decided that it should be published, and it was, and people took issue with it, and there was a big flack about it for a couple of different reasons. But I think that as an editor, you have to be prepared to say, nope, this is an important question for us to consider, regardless of, what one, you can publish something, it will offend anybody. You have to be able to say, this is an important consideration. You can't look for literature that says nice things and puppies and unicorns about everybody all the time. With that said, you have to, as Marlee said, make sure that people have a very good argument, and that the work of authors is solid, and that you have an understanding. We don't all have to agree on things. And it's very important to approach the literature respectfully, and the authors respectfully, and the work of the board respectfully, because the board does an enormous amount of work, and the peer reviewers. So you've got the level of the board, you've got the peer reviewers who are coming in from the membership, and you've got the editor who's trying to wrangle all of this together. There's a lot of work that goes on into this, and the editor has to really, the decision stops with the editor, but there are multiple layers of input that go into that decision. And so when I make an editorial decision, I'm very confident in the editorial board. I'm very confident in the peer reviewers. And ultimately, I have to be confident in myself.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Good answer.
Thanks, David, for that question. That was great. We're getting some action in the chat. I'm going to read Michelle Novak, who is our representative from SNAP. She's a former Rutgers alum as well. And so she was the one who encouraged us to share this with the students and new archives professionals group, which is really great. So thanks, Michelle, but she's staying muted because she lost her voice. What is the typical turn from first draft submission? FYI, I always call my first drafts sacrificial drafts. That's amazing. Through peer review and publishing.
It depends. Weeks, months, or years. It depends. And it depends on a lot of things. The peer review process, we tried to turn that around in about a month to a month and a half. That does not always work. Everybody is busy, and I frequently have peer reviewers who either bug out and can't complete the review, or for whatever reason just are late. So I work very hard to make sure that peer review is timely and is done effectively. If somebody's struggling and having trouble getting something, I will go to an alternate peer reviewer, but that then resets the clock essentially, and gives another person another 30 days to do a review. So the peer review process can sometimes take quite some time. It just really, really depends on the process. So if you are interested in being a peer reviewer and you sign up for that, if you're asked to do one, please do it in a timely fashion. People are waiting for you. There's also the process of then after the peer review is done, I try to pick that up as quickly as possible. I say, try to get to that within a few weeks. It really kind of depends on my workload. It also depends on the system. The editorial manager system sometimes takes things and puts it in back channels where I can't find it. But I think I've got those. I think I've got my workarounds. But there are times when things get a little muddy. It also depends on how quickly people do a revision. You get a revise and resubmit, and people get busy. And so, I ask for a revision within 30 days. Sometimes people can do that, sometimes they can't. So it depends on the author or the combined authors, because there are often a number of authors. And it also depends on what is going on with the journal. For example, next issue I mentioned we are publishing the census material. That means that there's a little less room in that journal, and not physical room. We have physical because we're a digital publication, but people are not going to read a 500-page digital publication. So we have a little less, fewer regular articles and more focus on that part. For a special section, we have the special section articles that are coming out, and that means that there are fewer. So right now, I'm working very far ahead. I'm assigning things about a year into the future, and that means that people have lots of time to do their revisions, but it also means that the publishing timeline takes a little bit longer. So it's an interesting question, and there are lots and lots of variables.
Thanks for that question, Michelle. We've got another question from the chat from Carolyn Quimby, which is about peer reviewing as a new and for new and emerging professionals. Can early career professionals become peer reviewers, and are there specific qualifications to becoming one?
They can, and we don't have a set of guidelines. There isn't something. We did have a peer review forum earlier this year, and it was really interesting because a lot of people think, well, I have to be this or that or the other thing to be a peer reviewer. Not really. You can sign up to be a peer reviewer on our editorial page. I can find that and put it in the chat. But they're just on the Meridian Press, on the Allen Press page, where you go for the issues. You can sign up to be a peer reviewer. Here we go. Come on, there you go. When you are a peer reviewer, we do use a rubric that peer reviewers follow, and it provides you kind of a structured look at how to consider an article. The more detailed that you can be in that response to that rubric, the better. And so if you're interested in peer reviewing, that's great. You can sign up, absolutely. I would recommend you take a look at that rubric as you are thinking about that, because that is a really good structure for how we evaluate articles. It's always also a good structure for us, for you to look at as an author, by the way, because it shows you what we're looking at and what we're considering in the peer review process. The other thing that I would say is that if you're interested in peer review, make sure that you understand and you have the opportunity to select subject areas. Be selective in that. Don't select everything. You're not an expert in everything. What are you expert in? Maybe you're expert in digital publishing or digitization, or maybe you're expert in collection management, or perhaps in reference services, or think of a few areas where you really feel like you have something to offer in reading those articles, because that is where I go to try and figure out who's going to be a good peer reviewer for this particular article. Also, don't be discouraged if you sign up as a peer reviewer and you're not asked the next week or the next month. There are lots and lots of peer reviewers. I try really hard not to hit the same people all the time. I try very hard to get a diverse representation in the peer review process. I think it's very important to have a diversity of voices in that. People coming from different areas, different repositories, but you all share one thing, and that is an expertise in a particular subject area. So when you're thinking about that, be sure to make sure that your subject areas are where you have something to offer.
And I really do, like, as someone who is an early career professional and reviews articles, it's great. Like, if you think that it's something that you would enjoy, and if you think that it's something that you have a viewpoint and have something to offer, definitely please sign up and give it a go, because like I said, I get so much value from it, and I think that there's a lot to learn. I learn something every time I review an article, even if it's just about like the mechanics of writing and structuring articles, and how you present research and how you organize research. And then on top of that, what the content of what the person is or people are writing about. So I do highly recommend it. And also, like, don't let the word expert scare you. Like, it's okay. Like, you know, that thing where if like, some people only apply for a job if they have 100% of the things available, like if they have experience in 100% of the things listed. Don't be that person. Be someone where like 80% is fine.
Yeah.
You know, give it a go anyway. And if you need help, like, Amy is an absolutely wonderful editor, and she makes herself available for me all the time when I have questions and thoughts and concerns and need a bit of steering. And so, you know, do not hesitate. She's a wonderful person to learn from and collaborate with.
Thank you.
So
and I do love to talk to people, editors, peer reviewers, groups here on Zoom. I talk to just anybody, because I really love the work that we do. The journal is important. The journal is viable. It's our conversation within the literature. So if you have questions, just ask me.
Thank you so much, both of you. I've not only enjoyed hearing each side, you know, different sort of elements from each of you, but also the way you kind of work together, which is really great to see. but I think that, we're a little after 7 now, and I think that we're gonna say goodbye. And thank you so much again. We really enjoyed talking to you as well, and it was really exciting to be able to put this together. So I was super psyched. And I look forward to talking more with both of you in the future.
Thanks, everybody. It's just a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Be well. Take care.
Take care.